Coming up, the smartest way to run in a brand new engine. I'm John Cadogan from AutoExpert.com.au, the place where Australian new car buyers save thousands off their next new cars. Hit me up on the website for that. The following report is inspired by a question I got recently from a guy named Chris, whom I must thank sincerely because not only is he a rational enquirer, he's also a customer. I have now signed on the bottom line for a Kia Sorento purchased via your Georgie partners. Do you have any advice on running in a new Kia Sorento diesel when brand new? I understand that for the first 1,000 kilometres, new vehicles should be nurtured with no sudden acceleration, say at traffic lights, no driving over 100 kilometres an hour, no high revving, etc. Some vehicles have motors run in at the factory and perhaps Kia does this. We have the towbar fitted to start towing as soon as we can. Do you have a recommendation here? Okay, so there's two prevailing pub expert views on running engines in, and they are both emphatically bullshit. So do not listen to people who opine thus. Your first pub expert is going to say, mate, engines are already running at the factory. You don't need to worry about it. And the second pub expert, right, he's the guy who's going to tell you that it's very, very complex and you just wouldn't understand because, frankly, to get this right, you must be a flat-out engine engineering Yoda. Now, they're both full of it, okay? It is actually very simple to run a brand new engine in. You can get this right. The environment that most people drive in is absolutely perfect. As long as you play by just a few caveats and observe them, you're gonna be okay. Let's talk about the underlying tech. A lot of people's impression of running an engine in is steeped in history. You know, it's 40 or 50 years out of date, and a lot has happened in that time in terms of lubrication, in terms of metallurgy, and in terms of the tech and components in a modern engine. See, there are anti-friction coatings on pistons now, right? The cylinder bores are likely to be that high silica alloy blend of cast iron, okay? And it is honed to virtually a mirror finish, so it's kind of harder and smoother than ever before. You've got these pre-ground multi-angle valve seats that are ready to rock out of the box. And then upstairs in the engine, it's likely to have the camshaft direct on a tappet, or it's likely to have roller rockers or stuff that was very exotic in the 70s but mundane now. And you've got variable valve timing and a whole bunch of high-tech components. And you throw that into the mix with new lubrication, all right? And people miss the point on this. Modern oil is runnier than the old stuff, okay? The old stuff was mineral-based. The new stuff is purely synthetic. It comes out of a lab. You put it between your fingers and have a little rub and you go, yeah, that's slippery, and it kind of pours like water. It's got low viscosity at room temperature. But you miss the point, okay? Slipperiness is only part of the deal with oil. When you squeeze it down under immense pressure, hundreds of kilopascals of pressure, hundreds of atmospheres, if you like. It might be megapascals, I don't know, I'd have to look it up. But it's immense pressure, more than you can do by just squeezing it between your fingers. The real miracle of oil is that the film remains tough. There's a limit beyond which it does not like to be squeezed, and it is slippery when it's squeezed like that. When you make an oil that is much more runny, much thinner like that, you've got to change the design of the engine as well, right? You've got to change the clearances and you've got to improve the tolerances. Because when you put, for example, a journal in a bearing, that's the ground bit of the crankshaft that sits in the bearing between those special alloy bearing sleeves, all right? When you grind a journal down to fit a particular bearing, part of the clearance is all about the bits warming up and operating and being at the Goldilocks measurement. And that Goldilocks measurement also includes an allowance for the Goldilocks thickness of oil. So when you change the oil, you've got to change the clearances. It just makes sense, right? And you've got to change the finishes in certain cases as well, like on the cylinder bores. So modern engines are just not the same as they were in the 70s, and some components formerly, like valve seats that needed to be bedded in, simply do not need that now because of improvements. Times change and, nobody puts horseshoes on anymore. This is kind of that, I guess. Running an engine in, the idiot-proof guide to doing this. Now, up front, I'm not sure I agree with everything that Chris said in his email. He kind of goes, no sudden acceleration, and I kind of think some sudden acceleration might be okay within limits, take it easy early on. He says no driving over 100 kilometres an hour. That's fine. You're allowed to go over 100. I mean, good luck finding places that you can do that easily around most of our capital cities in Australia. But what you really want to avoid, rather than being fixated on speed and what speed you should not go over running your engine in, you've got to be careful not to drone on constantly at the same speed in the same gear, because you don't want to run your engine in only at 1200 revs or 2000 revs at a particular load that gets you up to, 100 k's an hour or something. You want to vary the speed. We'll get to that in just a second. And he goes, no high revving, etc. So I kind of disagree with that as well, within limits. Some high revving is a good idea during the run-in process, especially later in the piece when you're getting to, 4, 5, 6, 700 kilometres. Some high revving is fine. One of the things you really want to avoid, particularly early on, is high revs and big throttle inputs, because those two things combined, and it's the two of them, not just one or the other, it's those two things that build up the maximum pressure inside the cylinder, and that can have negative consequences early on for how things like the rings actually bed in the bores. So you want to avoid that, but 100 k's an hour is fine. A few high revs is fine. And some moderate to hard acceleration is also fine for running in your engine. So here's how you do it in detail, right? You sign on the dotted line, you pick up your fine vehicle at the dealership, they wave you goodbye and they say, let us look forward, both of us, to bending you over emphatically once again at the end of a 3 to 5 year experience with this car. And then you go, well, what do I do about my engine? And I certainly would not be asking anyone at the dealership for advice, because that's not their caper. Even in the service department, there's a whole bunch of uninformed views about how to do that. So for most of us who buy mainstream cars, which are personal transportation or family transportation, i.e. not performance cars, here's what you do. In principle, what you want to do for running in, and this is for, 500 to 1,000 kilometres, which sounds a long way, but for your average driver in Australia, it's really only 2, 3 or 4 weeks of normal driving. So here's what you do. The best environment, and it is textbook, it's tailor-made, and it's out there, just outside your driveway. The best environment for running your car in is traffic. We all hate traffic. We all hate being stuck in it. We all hate going from A to B in our 1.5 tonne metal boxes with everybody else in a big queue just before work and just after work. It's hateful, but it's great for running in your engine, because what you want to do is you want moderate throttle inputs, you want to cycle the engine through the revs, and you want to vary the speeds and the loads, because it is that variety that is going to do the job better than anything else. The open road is a bad place to run in an engine. Because look at it like this. In moderate traffic, what happens? You all stop at a red light. You're in a queue, and then the light goes green, and then there's a sort of moderate derby, whatever, tomato of sorts, where you all race to some degree to the next red light. And when that happens, you get on the gas and the tacho cycles up and back and up and back and up and back as you go through the 2, 3, 4, 5 or 6 gears, depending on what speed you reach before the next light goes red. And this is the perfect environment for running in your engine. And as for this comment Chris made about, engines should be nurtured, I agree that they should be nurtured during the run-in process, but they absolutely should not be babied. This is not a new baby, it's a machine. You're allowed to drive it moderately aggressively, I'd say assertively, because if you don't drive hard enough, the rings are not going to seat properly either. So if you baby the damn thing, you are doing it a disservice. And what I'd suggest is that maybe if this is a 3-week process for you, the first week you might drive fairly gently in traffic to and from, no racing, no redlining, no full throttle. Then the next week you might drive more assertively than that, higher revs, more throttle, and the week after that, as you approach that 1,000 kilometre benchmark, or maybe you want to go 500, I don't think it really matters. Between 500 and 1,000, just arbitrarily pick a number between those two limits, and your engine's going to be, for practical intents and purposes, run in after that. So for the final week of the run-in, you're allowed to go up there even further and drive a little bit harder from time to time. But the main thing is different loads, different throttle inputs, range of speeds, cycle through the gears. This is what is going to bed in all those mating surfaces that need to make friends with each other. That's what's going to do the job. There is, of course, one caveat here. We've been talking about mainstream vehicles so far. Let's talk about performance vehicles now though, okay? Because performance vehicles are a completely different kettle of fish. You buy your new Mustang or your Chrysler 300C SR T8 or whatever, or an STI, something with a small engine and a massive turbo. You could do it a real disservice if you go out too hard too early. So don't do that, okay? You want to drive fairly gently in the context of maximum performance. So you're probably going to drive just like you'd drive a mainstream car with those kinds of driving inputs, but don't go anywhere, in a performance car at least, near the maximums for the first 500 to 1,000 kilometres. And I know this is hard to do because you drop the big bucks and you get that big performance car, and then you've got to delay that gratification for 4 weeks. And frankly, that's got to hurt. But that's what you've got to do, because there's much more pressure in the cylinders of a performance car at peak revs, peak power, full throttle, all that stuff. And you can absolutely do it a major disservice if you exploit that peak performance too early in the piece. So just do not go there for the first 1,000 kilometres and then thrash away, because certainly you have earned it. So you've just finished running your engine in, you've been in traffic, you've cycled through the revs, you've done all that stuff, you've hit the critical 1,000 kilometre benchmark, which is, 600 miles in America. Once you've done that, if you want to feel as if you're going the extra mile, giving the new baby every opportunity for success, here's what I suggest you do. Change the damn oil. Now, I am unconvinced that this makes any difference whatsoever in a modern engine, but hey, it can't hurt and it might make you feel good. When I say it can't hurt, it can't hurt provided you remember to put fresh oil in. That's a trap for young players, isn't it? And rather an expensive one too, I'd suggest. And let's not forget, as a sort of addendum, it'll also undo all of that diligent engine run-in work you've been practicing for the past 3 or 4 weeks. So there's that. It's a $15,000 mistake, basically. And as a side note on doing that, I'd also suggest that if you do any servicing work on your own car, the DIY approach opens the door to the car company voiding your warranty, because you are allowed to get independent people outside the dealer network to service your car, and the car maker may not terminate your warranty as a result of that, provided these people are what the ACCC call, quote unquote, qualified staff, okay? In practice, that means a proper mechanic. So doing your own servicing, any of it, just opens the door to the worst kind of financial disaster in the event of a major failure of something like a powertrain component or anything like that, where you have to go and stand next to the damn defibrillator before they will tell you what the repairs are going to cost. So maybe don't do that yourself. But, you know, if you want to make the new baby feel special, change the oil. If there are any microscopic metal particles down there, then, you know, you'll flush them out, potentially. I don't know that that makes any difference, but hey, knock yourself out. Now, let us unleash an export-grade nut that came in just the other day in the comments. And now, the view of yet another nut hiding behind a fake name. This time, innocent bystander. The climate has always changed. Shove your propaganda indoctrination up your bum. It's a fucking car channel, John, not the United Nations Agenda 2030 hour. I'll skip this one. You've pissed me off again. Well, thank you so much for that interesting view, Mr. Bystander. Let me just address two minor points up front. Firstly, on your allegation that this is a reproductive car channel, how about you let me decide what's in and what's out? Because it's a free set of videos on YouTube. If you don't like it, mate, just click away. That's how this works. Please do not presume to give me executive producerial advice, because I kind of hate that. I love it and I hate it because, grist for the mill. But anyway, on me pissing you off again, thank you so much for letting me know. Being pissed off and getting people pissed off is something that I am absolutely happy to do, because in my experience on television, in radio and now online, I'd suggest that the pissed off audience member is the most passionate, most engaged audience member. So hey, I'm all for it. And I'm actually kind of worried that my current dislike to like ratio is running at only 8 or 9%. That's just completely inadequate in my view. What we really need here is 25% pissed off viewers. That's the Goldilocks number. So I'm going to strive for that, and it guts me every month to review the stats and see that number hovering down there at just 8%. Anyway, let me see what I can do. Now, on your main point, I would suggest to you that there are facts and opinion, and this stuff is in the domain of ontological fact. The jury is in on climate change. It is anthropogenic. We are doing it. It is a credible, serious threat to future generations of humanity. NASA and NOAA, the space agency, which spends more time looking at Earth from space, has agreed on this, and NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, concurs, and so does every other credible climate scientist. We're doing it. They argue about the details in much the same way as theoretical physicists argue about the granular detail of gravity. That still doesn't mean it's a good idea to step off the 4th floor friggin' balcony because the physicists are arguing about gravity, okay? It's just like that. This stuff is in the domain of facts. So my challenge to you climate change denying nutjobs is this. I want you to go out and convince one guy who serves, like all the personnel at NASA and NOAA, at the pleasure of a Republican administration in Retardistan. And the Republicans, let's face it, are not overjoyed about climate change, just like the liberal fucktards here currently in government. It's an inconvenient truth for both of those political camps, and yet the jury is still in. So the guy is General Joseph F. Dunford, okay? Now you can reach him at the Pentagon. He's in the big office because he is the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and he serves purely at the pleasure of the president, all right? Now, the Pentagon, let's not forget, the Pentagon and General Dunford specifically, he has the keys to the 10 Nimitz-class aircraft carriers and the 1 Gerald R. Ford-class carrier that's even bigger, and the battle groups that sail with each carrier with such incredible capacity to project force anywhere on Earth. He's got those keys, right? And the Pentagon and General Dunford, who oversees it, are spending all of this time and money and effort making plans to deal with the wars that will break out as an inevitable consequence of anthropogenic climate change. This is not theoretical for the Pentagon, it's real. They're doing it. They are devoting serious resources to the achievement of stability for America, right? That's what they do. So why don't you just ring General Dunford if you're one of those nut jobs who thinks this is a matter of opinion, it's, you know, a matter of epistemology or something like that. Ring the Pentagon, okay? It's country code 1-703-697-1776. That number again, country code 1-703-697-1776. Nice touch on the 1776, I have to say. Just ring General Dunford and explain to him, tell him who you are. Hello, it is innocent bystander here with an important update on climate change for General Dunford. I'm sure you'll go straight through. Just convince the big dude in the corner office, to the extent that there is one in the Pentagon, just convince him that he's full of it. He's been making these plans under entirely false pretenses. It's all a hoax. It strikes me that General Dunford probably doesn't get up every morning and think to himself, I wonder how enthusiastically I can suck United Nations agenda cock this morning. So just talk to General Dunford, talk him around, and then get him to get onto NASA and NOAA and convince them how wrong they are as well. And when you kick that particular goal, get back to me, right? Until then, however, let us do this. Let us acknowledge that there are facts, okay? And facts don't give a shit how convenient they are for you, and they don't give a shit what you think. Climate change is real. We're doing it. We need to address it. Otherwise, humanity is, what's that word? Humanity's fucked.